It's America's #1 cash crop. Bigger than corn, bigger than tobacco.
Marijuana is #1, ahead of everything.
Marijuana has been around since the founding of America.
So much of our history was around the hemp plant.
Both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson grew it on their farms.
The founding fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence on hemp paper.
It was even used as legal tender.
You could certainly pay your taxes with hemp.
Today, some 100 million Americans have smoked it. 20 million toke up regularly.
People want to smoke pot.
In fact, 30% of the country lives in places where usage is decriminalized.
This is pure relief, and it's definitely not about getting high.
Am I allowed to say bull?
How can anything that will cause an addiction be okay?
So what is it about this little green plant that incites so much passion?
What do I think about marijuana? Hell no!
Whatever it is, it's been a long, strange trip.
Who is one person to tell you what you can and can't do with your life?
Pot is cropping up in New Jersey. Heather Hatton joins us to tell us about the progress of New Jersey's medical marijuana law. We're finally actually getting some progress there. You mentioned in your story, of course, there's a 5,000 square foot facility somewhere in Jersey. We don't know where effectively, I guess, the first contractor is growing his crop that will be available for medical marijuana
and
users.
Finally is the right word here. I mean, this law was passed way back in January 2010, and it's been a bumpy road since. So both locally, a lot of towns said, heck no, we don't want pot growing in our towns. And then also federally, the Obama administration has been put more scrutiny on this process. Governor Christie ultimately decided to go forward. And this is the first provider that is now growing medical marijuana in a facility in northern New Jersey. They won't disclose the location, but it will be dispensed in Montclair.
2 years ago, the Obama Justice Department said shockwaves throughout the country when they released new guidelines telling federal authorities not to arrest marijuana users and suppliers who weren't violating local laws. Eric Holder even said that it would be an insufficient use of funds, going after people in states where medical marijuana had been legalized. But now it seems like they've done a complete 180. The Department of Justice has recently sent letters to states threatening that they will go after state employees and will look at both civil and criminal penalties for those who run large-scale operations, even if they're acceptable under state law. And already many states that were headed towards a medicinal legalization path have started to back off. So why the drastic shift in policy? And could this doom the medical marijuana industry?
First is that if this state of California were to in fact make this marijuana no longer illegal for adults, that is not at all the same thing as condoning it. We don't condone the smoking of cigarettes or the using of alcohol, etc. So to put that label on it, I think, is inappropriate. Number two, as I have an understanding that today, as we speak here in Sacramento, that there are thousands of people in prisons in the state of California today for doing nothing but smoking marijuana. Thousands in prison for doing nothing but smoking marijuana. Why? Because they're on parole for one reason or another. And once they get off parole for whatever that offense was, if they smoke marijuana, it's a violation of parole, and they're immediately put back into state prison with all of the benefits that they had accrued, getting jobs, etc., supporting their families, being lost.
So there's 6 providers who got licenses. The Greenleaf, the one in Montclair, is furthest along. They're the only ones who are now growing.
What's holding them up?
A lot of it is location. So like I said, towns don't want them to set up there. But there is another provider in South Jersey that is finishing the very extensive background checks. New Jersey is really trying to be a model of a more secure form of this, not like Colorado or California. So they put the providers through about 6 to 7 months of background checks.
What are the differences, by the way, about with California and Colorado as opposed to Jersey?
This is much more of a medical marijuana model where it's prescription-based. So licensed doctors who sign up to do this prescribe it to patients. So the list of about 100 doctors who have agreed to participate is already out. The patient registry is now going to be out in August, and so the doctors will actually prescribe this medicine.
As opposed to California and Colorado, where
it's a lot looser in terms of how you get it. So it's not a medical doctor-based model as much as New Jersey.
Okay.
Another one is that the tougher we get with regard to marijuana prosecution, literally, from my experience as a judge, and I have seen this in Orange County forever, the softer we get with the prosecution of everything else. And that is something that we simply have so many resources, and if we're spending them in prosecutions of marijuana, we are not spending them for prosecutions of rape, homicide, etc. Then,
prohibitions do not eliminate the market for illicit goods. Prohibitions do, however, increase violence and increase the risk of overdose. The recent history of the United States includes two major periods of prohibition: federal alcohol prohibition from 1920 to 1933, and the current war on drugs, which began in 1971. During both of these periods, we witnessed increases in the homicide death rate that correspond to enforcement of these prohibitions.
Marijuana will never put this violence that we heard earlier out of business. All of these statistics that you heard earlier about the violence and the killings of both the police officers and everyone else is occurring under today's system of marijuana prohibition, etc. The only way you put these Mexican cartels out of business and these other violent creatures out of business is to undercut the price, to make it no longer illegal so that you don't have that enormous profit motive to get these people involved with that violence, etc. The only way you do it is to undercut the price, and Assembly Bill 390 is a really good place to start. Otherwise, there are marijuana today that is stronger in our society without a doubt. But the reason why it's out there and stronger is because of marijuana prohibition. That there are lots of people who would much prefer, like you said, not to use the stronger stuff, but the cardinal rule of prohibition is always push the stronger stuff. So if I'm a bootlegger and I run into the same criminal justice problems for selling a barrel of beer as a barrel of bourbon, guess which one I'm going to push? The bourbon, because I make more money. It's the same thing with marijuana.
Why do prohibitions lead to violence? First, we have to recognize that prohibiting the production or consumption of a substance does not eliminate its use. Almost half of high school seniors report using an illegal substance in their life. Prohibition merely drives the market for drugs underground. Producers operate in a black market, and consumers conceal their behavior. Economics predicts a variety of adverse effects of black markets. The evidence confirms these effects. In a black market, when disputes arise over sales territory, over product quality, over correct change, the legal system is not available. Drug producers and consumers must resolve their own disputes and may rely on violence to do so. Further, law enforcement expends resources to enforce prohibitions. The time that police officers spend chasing drug dealers and users is time not spent catching murderers, thieves, or rapists. Prison space used to house drug dealers and users is space not available for other, more serious criminals. One estimate suggests that homicide rates are 25% to 75% higher than they would be in the absence of drug prohibition. If your goal is to reduce the consumption of marijuana, cocaine, meth, or heroin, there are other policy choices available. A policy regime such as the one we have with tobacco, with high tax rates, minimum smoking ages, and extensive education campaign could keep the consumption of these drugs relatively low while avoiding the violence and quality issues associated with the black market.